What is your best one time my dad story? This is a dark story, but I still want to tell it because it really means something to me. After my mom and dad got married, my dad would often come home late at night, very drunk. Almost every night he would be too drunk to function. My dad never thought twice about his alcoholism until my mother went into labor for the first time. And he was so drunk my mom had to call our next door neighbor to drive my mom to a hospital. My dad was too drunk to drive his wife to a hospital to give birth to his own son. Since that moment, he has never touched a bear. I am a Bengali. And as all good Bengalis, we went to see tigers in North Bengal. Spoiler alert. No tigers. After one pretty disappointing day of missing 2 elephant herds and seeing no wildcat, much less a tiger, we stop at a dried up riverbed. We are effing tired. The sun is setting. The peacocks are screaming. The usual. Suddenly, we hear a growl. Monkeys are going nuts. The telltale sign of a tiger nearby. The guide tells us to rush to our jeeps. We oblige. But just before boarding, I see my dad smirking hard. After an hour of waiting, we see no tigers and head home. The next morning, while everyone is freaking out over the growl, Dad pulls me aside and says that it was a burp. A fucking burp. So I can proudly say that once my dad burped so hard the jungle thought it was a tiger. One time my dad set my mom on fire. This was about 2 years ago. We were camping and were having trouble getting a fire started. My dad remembered that he had a container of flame accelerant in the trailer. I think it was lighter fluid or something. Anyways, he squirted some of it into the fire pit and we got it going. A little bit later, he decided it would be a really great idea to just use up the rest of the accelerant, so he pours it on the fire. Not the wood. Like before. Flames. So the bottle obviously starts on fire as well. And my dad freaks out and throws it on the ground and then tries to stomp on it to put it out. Which led to a stream of flames and fluid shooting out from the bottle and landing right on my mom's leg. It only burned for about 5 seconds and I kept yelling stop, drop and roll at her, which she, of course, did not do, and tried to hold my laughter in until my mother was no longer ablaze. My dad isn't in charge of starting fires anymore. When I was 17, my crush arrived to pick me up to go hang out. He didn't come to the front door. He just honked from the driveway. So my dad got all pissy. That's not how you treat a lady. Honking is unacceptable. And didn't let me go out. He brought up that scenario repeatedly for years. As a baseline for how my dates should treat me. He hated that guy. I got married a few years later. And my husband died a few years into our relationship. A few years after he died, I was joking with my dad about the guy honking his horn and my dad looks at me and says, wait. That was the same guy. Yes, Dad. That was the same guy. He'd never realized that I'd married the honking guy. I didn't know that he didn't know. My kids love that story. It's pretty hilarious. One time we went to Universal Studios and my dad took me on the Hulk roller coaster even though he knew it would make him sick. I was afraid of coasters at that point and he sacrificed himself because he knew I would never go on the ride without him. When we got off, his face was completely colorless and his stomach was done working correctly for the rest of the day. But I loved the roller coaster. One time my dad ripped a humongous fart and killed all the power in the neighborhood. Literally. PHHHT. Dark. Spoiler. We later found out that someone had hit a pole further up the line at that exact moment. It made perfect sense to us kids. Dad's an electrician. And has deadly farts. PHHHT. Dark. Now I use this as an example that correlation is not causation. One time, my dad was sitting on the couch in our living room. Mom brought out a bag of sugar and asked him to open it. He opened it like it was a bag of Doritos. And I mean, it was everywhere. He was only wearing his shorts. So there was sugar in just about every square inch of his visible hair as well as all over our couch and carpet. Took him 4 showers in a row to get it all off. One time my dad almost slit my throat because he thought I was a burglar. I had snuck downstairs for some reason. I was in the kitchen and heard him coming in. So I hid behind the kitchen counter. Heard my dad opening drawers and things. Next thing I know, he had leaned over the counter and grabbed my head. Had a kitchen knife to my throat. A split second later he realized it was me and dropped me. Then I got yelled at because he had heard me breathing. Thought I was a home intruder. And I almost got in a world of pain. He was shaking from adrenaline. As a dad now myself, I can imagine the state of mind he was in. One time my dad came home after I had a party at the house. There were girls dancing together on the pool table. And one of them had Cheeto dust on their fingers. I tried to clean it, but couldn't get all of it before they got home. He calls me downstairs and asks about the marks on the table. I couldn't think of a lie, so I just told him the truth. He stares for a couple seconds and then says, "Nice. Damn. You were still grounded. Weren't you?" Actually no, I wasn't. I also told him on the phone I was going over to a friend's to play video games. I was lying to go see a girl. His response on the phone was, "Okay. Wash your hands when you're done with her." I silently said okay after about a 5-second pause. So we were having a family dinner over the summer and my sister had been at a barbecue the day before and the host gave her a big bowl of fruit salad to take home. We're sitting there having dinner and my dad is staring at the fruit salad with this weird look on his face and he says, "What are these little blue things?" while holding up a blueberry. We were like, "How the FCK do you not know what a blueberry is?" Then realized my mom hates blueberries, so dude hasn't seen a blueberry in 45 years and forgot they existed. One time my dad took my brother's walkie-talkie and had us and about 10 kids in the neighborhood convinced that we had picked up a signal from a plane that was crashing towards the earth. We were running up and down the streets for an hour with our eyes on the sky listening as the pilot tried to reach someone for help. Dad's windows were open, so we eventually caught onto the heinous laughter echoing between the houses after every Mayday. When my sister and I were very young, my dad took us to a local mini golf course. It was pretty extensive. Had a bunch of fountains and water features incorporated into it. After a particularly bad putt, my dad's ball popped over the green and into one of the ponds. He said nothing, but took his wallet out of his pocket. This was before cell phones were commonplace. And put it into my hands. He then jumped into the pond and began searching for the ball. He couldn't find it and marched straight over, soaking wet, to the cashier and asked for a new ball. When the bewildered cashier gave him one, my dad told him, "Hey, just so you know, there's some guy wearing a white t-shirt and black shorts swimming around in one of your ponds." This description matching my dad himself. Security escorted us out not long after, but my sister and I were too busy laughing to care too much. Whenever I bring up this story to my dad, all he says is, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Well, I had to get a new ball somehow." Double quote. One time my dad had finally had enough of my two brothers fucking around. They were always doing something that was causing problems or was something degenerate. This time, they were shoveling manure out of a wagon and had started to shovel it at each other. They thought it was funny. My dad saw this and got seriously pissed. He took my one brother's pitchfork covered with manure and started throwing the manure at my other brother saying, "How do you like this shit?" He was so pissed and wee bit out of control that he accidentally stabbed my brother's leg with one of the shitty tines. That was difficult to explain to the ER nurse. One time while in the car waiting for our dad to drive me and my siblings to school, he closed the garage door but waiting until it was almost closed and rolled under it like Indiana Jones. My brother and sisters thought it was hilarious. One time my dad scared the shit out of my sisters and all their friends. They were having a slumber party and my dad told them our house was built on Indian burial grounds and it attracted evil. 10 minutes later he appeared outside the window with pantyhose over his head, a trench coat and a butcher knife. Some of the girls cried and my dad had to take them home. There are countless others but these are a few I remember right off the bat. He is a good dad. Once came paintballing with my friends. He got way into it. As in kicked over another kid, stole his gun and rammed it. After he used every last paintball of that kid's gun. Threw it on the floor. Picked up a plastic water barrels and ran using it as a shield. He get hit the whole time. Next day we're going on holiday. He was covered in bright purple swells and bruises. When he got in the pool everybody got out because he looked like he had some horrific disease. Cherish the memories guys and girls, you'll never know how much you'll miss those silly moments when they are gone. My dad has worked demolition his whole life. One time when inspecting something down a dead-end alley, 2 thugs rolled up with knives and tried to mug him. Seeing them coming, my dad grabbed a pickaxe handle out of the back of his truck, just the handle. No bit, and proceeded to beat the ever-living doc out of them. Turns out, the extra reach of a pickaxe handle makes knives mostly irrelevant. He then crossed the street to the police station the 2 geniuses had just attempted robbery in front of and got some nice men to take them away. My dad got off his motorbike on the England to France Channel ferry. He was desperate to use the toilet so he rushed right there. He sat there for a while doing his business and then he heard a woman's voice and thought, oh dear. She's come into the wrong bathroom. Then he heard more voices and realized a coach full of old ladies had just unloaded and he was in the women's bathroom. The queue began to pile up so he put on his motorcycle gear and walked out like the Stig. My dad is the king of rigging things so they just barely work with minimal resources. He also owns a tractor with a front bucket, think bulldozer if you aren't familiar, which he feels should be utilized as often as possible. The most epic of these I can recall was the year he decided to put Christmas lights on the hemlock tree in our front yard, about 40 feet tall. He got the old-fashioned big glass bulbs, very fragile. He had my brother climb the tree with an extension cord and bungee cord it in place. He fixed a 25-foot metal pole to the tractor bucket and tied the end of the light strings onto it. This immediately became a problem because the light bulbs broke on hitting it. His solution: have me hang upside down from the bucket and hold the light cords out away from the pipe so they wouldn't hit it. This was 20 years ago. The lights have not come down. They stopped working 18 years ago. One time I was fishing on a boat with my dad, mom, and brother. We had multiple fishing lines in the water. But being kids, we kept setting ours down to do other things as holding a fishing pole waiting for a bite can get boring. My unattended line got a bite and it must have been a big one because the fish pulled the pole in the water. My dad immediately sees what has happened and quickly dives into the lake after the runaway pole. My mother yells at him, "Your glasses." Mid-dive, he removes his glasses, tossing them back to my mother who catches them. The fishing pole was recovered. Fish was eaten for dinner. And dad didn't have to purchase a new pole. Obligatory not my dad, but when I was 9. I was staying at my mate's house and we decided to watch The Ring late at night for spooks. After the first 10 minutes or so, my friend's dad walked through the living room and into the kitchen for a midnight snack. Anyway, we get to the bit in the film where the phone rings for the first time and the girl says 7 days, which creeped me and my mate out big time. Just after that happens, the fucking house phone rings. We freaked out. Nobody would be calling after midnight. It's creepy, ring girl. We sprint into the kitchen, screaming at the top of our lungs, until we saw my friend's dad pointing at his mobile phone and laughing his ass off. R.I.P. that man. He was funny as hell. One time my dad threw fire logs from his second-story bedroom window into the garden below to scare a skunk family away from our small veggie garden. They immediately all sprayed in terror at giant chunks of wood raining down from the sky. The backyard reeked for a week. Lettuce wasn't worth it. Another time he thought it'd be a great idea to take a picture of the baby deer in his backyard by getting up and close to it. He was so busy focusing through his camera lens that he almost completely failed to see its mother charging at him. He just barely made it safely inside. My dad and fauna don't get along. My dad has an incredibly storied life. Hard to choose just one. I'll go with the hotel aquarium one. My dad was traveling for a trade show, and him and his buddies decided to play a prank on one of the guys there with them. While the target is out, they all go to the local pet store and buy little aquarium rocks, plants, and actual fish. They go to his hotel room and fill the bathtub. Put in the rocks, plants, and the fish. They hang out in a nearby room and wait for a message from the guy sharing the victim's room. Who is in on it? Once victim is in the bathroom, they sneak into his room and wait. It takes a good few minutes when they hear a "what the fuck?" Double quote. My dad is a former cop and now does private security for a bunch of different people and locations. About a year or two ago he tells my sister some big pop star is coming to the store he is guarding and they have to shut it down for a few hours. He says, I don't know, some lady named Bouncy or something. Turns out that it was F-King Bianca and my dad met her and everything, having no idea who she was the whole time. Even once we explained to him how famous she was and how crazy it is that he met her, he only talked about how he got to eat the leftover food they ordered for the lunch while she was there. Also, now without fail, every time he sees her on TV or in the news now, he still calls her Bouncy. So one weekend where my dad decided to treat my little bro and me to a trip to Yosemite. It was gorgeous. Saw Half Dome, Yosemite Falls, the works. By sundown we stopped by the ski lodge to get a bowl of clam chowder in a bread bowl. We get back to the car and the Corollo's locked into his son keys. They aren't in the car. Not in his pockets and not in the ski lodge. It's about 8 PM now and my little brother and me, 7 and 5 at the time, are getting tired and cranky. My dad is freaking out and has to wait about 2 hours for the locksmith. He got there in 3 hours and by midnight had the door unlocked. That was the first and last time my dad took me to Yosemite. Edit. Punctuation. One time, when I was about 13, I was at home and up late at night. I got up to get a drink and as I was coming back to the living room I spotted something moving down the hallways. Well, that something turned out to be my dad. Buck naked. With a pistol, moving in a stance that can only be described as the free sway walk. Turns out he heard on the baby monitor from my younger sister's room the sounds of two men talking about making the break-in quick. Our monitor crossed channels with a neighbor, who ended up being the one getting burgled. I'll never forget those dangly bits. I've tried. One time my dad gate crashed my first date with my now husband. I was 19. BF was 24. Being the first time I had dated a cool older guy, I was nervous and met BF out on the street hoping we could just go. BF, being raised with the right manners and morals, insisted on coming in to meet my dad. Cue polite awkward conversation where dad asked what we had planned that night. The exchange went something along the lines of, BF, we're going to dinner and a movie. Dad, I'm at home alone tonight with no plans. I wish I could go to dinner and a movie. BF, nervous reaction, you could come if you like. Dad, okay. We spent the next 20 minutes with my dad sitting in the front seat of BF's car complaining if we didn't leave soon we would miss the start of the movie. All the while I was on the verge of tears. I was so embarrassed and BF was just silent trying to figure out WTF was going on. It worked out in the end. Now we're married with a couple of kids and they go on man dates together all the time. One night before dinner, our house received a call from a telemarketer. Keep in mind this was in the days before we had cell phones and caller ID, so there was really no way we could screen the call. So my father answers and the telemarketer gives him the spiel for a good minute or so. My father, being the delightful smartass he is, says, I'm sorry, could you please repeat what you just said? The telemarketer again repeats his business for the call. I recall my dad having his silly face and his silly voice and again says, I'm sorry, can you please repeat what you just said? My brother and I were cracking up with dad and his trolling antics. But then came to a halt when my mom yelled, Get off the damn phone, Ned. Thus ending the fun. This is probably not my best dad story, but it is one that sticks out in my mind the most. TL. DR, my dad trolled a telemarketer. One time my dad and I were fishing on a sandy area by a river in Tennessee. I was about 8 years old. This was in the 1970s, mind you. Some teenagers, young adults, came to a bridge near us and started throwing M80s in the water and watched them float down and explode in the water near us. My dad yelled at the kids to stop it. They left. A few minutes later they drove by in their car and threw some lit M80s down at us while we resumed fishing. My dad said wait right here. He went up and took his pistol out of the car and hid in the trees by the road. The kids drove by again and started to throw more M80s at us. I heard several shots ring out as the car approached and left. My dad came back and resumed fishing with me. He said we wouldn't be bothered again. And we weren't. I miss him. When I was about 6, Applebee's has just come to our little town. So as a family we all went out to eat. I'm looking at the menu and I told my parents that I wanted the bee burger. And my dad informed me that everything in the restaurant was made with either apples or bees. Since I was ordering the bee burger, one could assume it was made of bees. I told my dad but I don't want to eat bees. And he said no sweetie, it's fine. Just make sure you order it without the stingers. Waitress comes to our table to take our order and I say with more confidence than I've ever had, I would like a bee burger. Hold the stingers please. I should have known by her face something was off, but my mom and dad were both stone-faced. I ate my bee burger. I was so pleased that it did not have the stingers in it. Dad told me when we got home and it's still his favorite story to tell every person who will listen. 20 years later. One time my dad decided he wanted to show off how resistant to spicy food he was. My little brother and I had come across some sort of absurdly hot pepper, taken from my then girlfriend's garden. I had tasted one on my own. And I swear, they nearly blinded me for a couple seconds after munching into them. Anyway, my brother challenges my dad to eat a handful of these little fire bombs. And of course my dad can't refuse, as he prides himself on loving spicy food. My dad and my brother are standing in the kitchen. My dad takes a few and starts chewing. And showing no emotion or pain, he calls my brother closer to look into his mouth to see how he was chewing them. My dad opens his mouth. And my brother moves close to peer inside. It was at this moment that the heat finally hit my dad. He involuntarily projectile spews the chewed up pepper and pepper juice directly into my brother's open, staring eyes. Nearly immediately, my dad takes off in one direction towards the sink and began running water over his tongue, while my brother ran to the bathroom and, fully clothed, jumps into the shower and rinses out his eyes while screaming he is blind and needs an ambulance. My dad is cackling while he moves on to milk, just pouring it over his tongue into the sink. While I check on my brother, who is sitting looking forsaken on the floor on the shower, crying and staring up into the falling water. This is a double dad story. One time, my stepdad told me my real dad didn't love me or want me around and that's why he didn't come to visit anymore. I was 13. I snuck into my mom's address book and called all the numbers that were listed under my dad and got through. I told him how I felt. That I wanted to see him and for him to be in my life and that I would understand if what my stepdad said was true. I just want to hear it from you, Dad, I said. I was scared out of my mind but I've always wanted the truth. He didn't hesitate as he said that he would never say that to me, and 2 weeks later I was visiting him and my stepmom and my newborn sister. Been visiting ever since.